Ripoffs versus inspiration. Yeah. Often the differentiation in that is if I like it, it's an homage. If I don't, it's a ripoff. But to be a bit more objective, we have to keep in mind that most art is an expression of ideas, often a reflection of the artist or the world of the artist. Because of that, art feeds back into itself so that it produces more with differing interpretations, perspectives, or enhancements. Art doesn't exist in a vacuum, and so art being derived from other art is understood. But that's where the word derivative as an insult can come in. In that sense, it implies that the artist is incapable of creating their own work and has instead just repackaged the work of others. An analogy I've often used is like writing a term paper. Getting ideas from others and using it to craft your own paper is much different than just taking something and changing a few words to make it different. So I think the differentiation between a rip-off and inspiration is that in the case of the former, the artist demonstrates an inability to do anything noteworthy beyond the original with the material. For instance, let's take Night of the Living Dead, which invented the modern zombie concept that has been seen in numerous media over the years. From the comic book The Walking Dead, to the novel World War Z, to the video game series Resident Evil, to the music video Thriller, and to numerous films over the past 40 plus years. But Night is the only one that gets credit for the concept of the mindless dead rising up to eat the living en masse. To be inspired by rather than a ripoff, a zombie work must add more to that. To build the concept in a different way, or a different interpretation, or some other way that examines the material or utilizes that material to lead to something noteworthy. That's why that if I like it or don't like it criteria is often used. Likewise, new schools of art in the various media come into being by visionaries, but are utilized by others who come afterwards, in many cases producing the most memorable and expressive of that school. But in order to do so, it has to do more than just be another Me Too, or it's little more than a copycat. Art crossing genres is one of the best ways to demonstrate inspiration. Star Trek was originally called Wagon Train to the Stars by way of explanation, that its science fiction wasn't going to be the typical stuff of that day. Star Wars uses elements of The Hidden Fortress and the concepts of Joseph Campbell's The Hero of a Thousand Faces. The Magnificent Seven was a retelling of Seven Samurai as Western. That's not saying that a cut and paste between genres means that it isn't a ripoff. Rather that through this reinterpretation you often can more easily rework the concept so that what you're adding to it is noteworthy. Let's examine the Alien series for a moment. The original Alien film and the second by James Cameron have little in common besides the monster, and are both considered great in their own ways. Alien 3, however, is rarely praised because, even though it's a new setting, it adds little to the original work. It's derivative, as most sequels are going to have to be by their very nature, but adds little new to the material. The second film itself is also derivative, but it adds much, much more, in part by drawing inspiration from Starship Troopers, arguably better than the actual Starship Troopers movie was. It produces something different than both of those by adding its own elements. Cameron seems to make a habit of this, in fact. He's had that notorious lawsuit by Harlan Ellison over the Terminator, as well as recent comments made about Avatar, showing how much money was wasted using American Indians in Dances with Wolves rather than just going with Blue Man Group. William Shakespeare is perhaps the crowning example of greatness coming from inspiration. Many know that Shakespeare's stories are not original. They were built upon stories that have been around for some time. Hamlet, for instance, was based on a Scandinavian tale about Amleth. Of course, Shakespeare is a giant of English literature, even though some might argue that he ripped off these other stories. But while Shakespeare's plots are well known, they're not what people admire about the man's work. Shakespeare used these works to break down previous boundaries. What made Hamlet one of the greatest plays in human history is not the plot. It's that the character of Hamlet is so richly developed with stirring prose, whether it's the famous to be or not to be speech that illustrates a man on the cusp of self-destruction, Alas, poor Yorick, that provides a fleeting look into his distant and happy youth that is nevertheless contrasted by the grim reality before him of human transience, and that his life is now bereft of such childish joy. And even the simple, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams. And of course there's so much more than that. Shakespeare is famous because his work, the original work that he did, inspired by others though it may have been, was extraordinary. He took something and he did something magical with it, and in so doing, he added value. Let's trace an example of inspiration versus ripoff with the criteria of adding value. Take Faust by Goethe, one of the classics that everybody knows the story of but probably hasn't actually read. In one scene, a witch is confronting Mephistopheles. And by the way, I am not trying to be funny here. I can't help it. Whenever I do the witch voice, it comes out like Janeway. I'm sorry. Try to ignore that. To see Squire Satan once more here. That title woman, I forbid it me. Why? Has it done you any injury? That's been known as a fable for many a season. But men have things no better for that reason. Free are they from the evil one. The evil are still here. Just call me Baron, that will satisfy me. What he in essence is saying here is that by men no longer believing he's real but just a metaphor, he's now more powerful than ever. Well, this idea inspired Charles Pierre Baudelaire, and when he wrote in the short story The Generous Gambler about a man having drinks with the devil shared an amusing warning by a preacher about his wiliness in a similar vein. My dear brethren, do not ever forget, when you hear the progress of lights praised, that the loveliest trick of the devil is to persuade you that he does not exist. That line further inspired the creators of the film The Usual Suspects. Its wording is similar to the English translation, though changed to fit the context and to reflect not the devil literally, but a man who was so dark, so mysterious, and so powerful that he was like the devil, a line that would be used to sum up just how frightening a creature this Kaiser Soze was. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. It likewise provides the subtle nudge as the person who actually is the devil is the one saying the line. A man some deny even exists, though they have actually talked to him. Later the line would be used in Exit Wound, starring Steven Seagal and Tom Arnold. Their use of it would be in a criminal explaining why he wasn't well known by giving that line word for word. It's at this point we have gone from inspiration to ripoff. In all the preceding versions, we saw the intent maintained with a new and concise phrasing, or of a similar phrasing but different intent. Both took that which came before it and built upon it, while the final one kept both for itself. It is nothing more than a Xerox machine, nothing more, no new substance, nothing to inspire anyone. Let's switch to music for a moment. Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower is an eerie apocalyptic piece, with its harmonica like the sound of a western town about to be hit by a storm. The Jimi Hendrix Experience then did their cover version that removed that, but at the same time added a strong flavor and a whole new sound to it that the cover version is likely far more notable than the original. If you compare Dylan's later performances of it, it's actually far more like Hendrix's take than his own original. It was not just a cover version, it was an improvement upon the original foundation. So then, why even make the distinction? If this is so common, why does it matter? It's the same reason why someone who copies their term paper gets a failing grade. You didn't do anything. Someone else did all the hard work, and all you're doing is repackaging it and hoping nobody will notice until you've cashed the paycheck. Most times an artist will be open about their inspiration because it was precisely that, an inspiration, something that left such an impression upon them that they wanted to explore it further. Those who rip others off are more likely to keep their inspiration to themselves and hope nobody notices. It is the former that is the artist, and the latter that is not. And that's a reason for contempt, because one is surrounding themselves with the veneer of artistry while being a fake. Anybody who knows how to read can make a few changes to Batman and create their own vigilante hero anti-hero. But when someone takes Batman apart to see what makes him tick, and puts him back together as, say, a borderline insane vigilante, or a sociopath trying to deal with his urges, they've built upon it, reinterpreted it, and if it works, done something that many people couldn't do. Inspiration from the works of others is only the beginning, but if the starting point and the ending point are the same, then obviously you're not going anywhere.